Hey everyone, just let me share the link for the live stream. And then we can start. Sorry, I have trouble logging in my into my Twitter account. Wait, we should do it. Almost there. All right. Hello everyone. So, can you hear me well?
Yes.
Great.
Let's
So yeah, maybe we can start. So I don't know if anybody is willing to take notes this week. Maybe Daniel Shavit, could you help with that? I don't know if you've ever been taking notes. Yeah, or some. And then maybe we can also pick like Daniel Norman. So that's two Daniels taking notes today.
Hey, I can't really help with the notes today because we've got some problem with the notes and
Oh,
unfunny.
that's fine. That's fine. That's perfectly fine. So then maybe I can ask Corey, would you be able to take notes? I don't know if you've been doing that recently, but
Yeah, sure. I can take notes.
cool, awesome. Great. Then,
A quick thing, Louis. Do you have the link for the notes?
oh yeah, can't you see it in the?
Is it just this one? Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
Does it work? Can you?
Yeah, it's working. Yep.
Cool. All right, then let's move on. I don't know if there's anyone new this week in the old devs. Then, if it's not the case, let's go on to the updates, and maybe we can start with Aragon 1. I don't know who is going to be updating about what Aragon 1 has been doing in the past 2 weeks.
Yeah, I can do it this time, and perhaps other people can fill in if I'm missing anything.
Cool.
The last 2 weeks we're mostly working on 0.7.4, which was released, I believe, about a week and a half ago on the 13th or 14th. So that included the autocomplete for local labels. It basically provides a small little completion, like a search engine to local labels in each input field. And there is, I believe, also a component in Aragon UI for this. Its API is still not like easily digestible by most developers, but we're working on that, and hopefully we'll have something more like stable for supporting local labels and other identity provider solutions down the line for 0.8. Other than that, we had our offsite and had a number of discussions about what 0.8 would look like, like what the release timing should look like, and what the things left are. In particular, we have a whole bunch of things for the front end to do for the design system. It's starting to wrap up. I believe quite a lot of conversation has happened with Patty and Pierre from other Flock teams as well about getting apps updated and just the direction of the design system. So Pierre and Patty are away, I think, until Wednesday this week, but everything's looking quite good. Pierre's been demoing the design system. We've basically introduced a couple of new components. We know now that Aragon UI is going to be only for Aragon apps. This gives us, it basically decreases the scope of like what we're trying to accomplish with this library. So it gives us a lot more narrowness in definition, and just lets us do more. Like it makes us create components that just make more sense in an Aragon context. We can name things with more reliability. That we're calling something the box now, and we know for sure like this is the box. This is like the container class that you're supposed to be using for the front end versus before, and it's really shaping the API quite nicely so that building an Aragon app on the front end side is going to be even easier with these UI components than before, because it's fully geared for that. Otherwise, we also have, I think we still have to update the forum post for what exactly will be in scope for 0.8. The current one that I'll share is a little bit outdated. We cut some of the scope, but it still includes the notification service that Daniel Norman has been working on. We've already seen a couple of demos of it, sending emails based on on-chain transactions, as well as the app caching that was introduced in 0.7.3. I think that's most of the updates from the product side. Again, 0.8, we're mostly just focused on that. And that's going to be released towards the end of July, maybe the start of August, depending on where the timeline looks. Jorge, I'm not sure if you're able to give more of an update on the network side of things, if anything has changed, but otherwise we can go.
Yeah. So on the court side, we've been working these past few weeks on one of the two big items that were still to be done, namely the final round for appeals, in which all the active jurors have to vote before a ruling can be considered final if it's appealed all the way up. There's already a pull request for that is being reviewed. So with this, the last big item for the court will be working on the subscription model, so that organizations pay a monthly or whatever cadence to be able to use the court. Outside of the court, we've been working on on proposal agreements, like more about discussing how we're gonna do it. We had an internal spec that, after some conversations in the offsite, we're gonna revamp a little bit and eventually publish to the forum. That's it.
Cool. Awesome. Great to hear about the offsite and that it was fruitful. Hope you had a great time there as a team. And yeah, then let's move on and maybe the team from like the Otark team can update us about the current status of things and congratulations on putting out your AGP, guys. I mean the draft of your AGP that's available on the forum. So
Yep. So as mentioned, we submitted the community AGP draft. So if possible, if anybody could look that over and give us feedback, it would be appreciated. Beyond that, we are in the process of going through audits of the front end code. Chad, our new team member, has been leading that initiative so that he can get familiarized with the code base and give us sort of an outside view on things that we could potentially change. So far, a lot of tooling changes have occurred. In addition, we're still moving forward with the changes to our contracts in response to our internal audits and feature ads that we want to put on before the next release cycle of our applications. And in that process, so far, we're basically in a place where we're ready to hand over address book and the rewards application to the team doing our audit, Mixed Bytes. So we'll be moving forward with that, and that'll be a primary focus for us, making sure that our contracts are in a good place, the feature ads that we want to get in before that are finalized, and we keep on that schedule. Beyond that, there's been a lot of work put towards finalizing a plan for the standard bounties upgrade path, which is in connection to the feature changes that we want to incorporate with projects.sol. So the standard bounties contract that Consensus posts has already gone through an audit and has a new version that's ready for release, which integrates things like meta transactions and some other small changes. So in response to that, we've needed to upgrade projects. The main issues that we've run into that are relevant to this call are basically ones around the fact that it's using Pragma 0.5 version. So we'll go over that in more detail on that action item. Beyond that, there's also been movement on profiles, which is basically finalized, and the specifications for discussions, which I'll pass it to John for more details.
It's really shaky, right? Oh, sorry.
John.
Oh yeah, hey. I'm assuming people can hear me.
Yep,
That's
we
good.
can,
Okay,
definitely.
awesome. I'm gonna start with the most important stuff first, in case my internet craps out. Discussions. One of the things that we've been working on first is handling external transaction intents and also reading from external transactions from another app. So external transaction intents are working, although the API interface, I think it needed a little bit of adjustment. I could be wrong, and maybe people can help steer in the right direction if that's not the case, to receive the external app's proxy address, as well as the code address. And so to handle that, we've also sort of built in a feature for apps to receive metadata about all the other installed apps in the DAO. So all that is working, and hopefully we could submit a PR soon with those changes. And it seems probably too tight to squeeze into the 0.8 release, but I'd be interested to know if that's something you all wanted to try and get in there. That's discussions basically as of now. Brett, yeah, awesome. I'll get that in soon. One of the things that's holding it up is I think the getting external app events also requires the proxy address instead of the code address. So I'd be interested to know how many DAOs or people are using those API methods, and if it would be okay to shift them around a bit, or if that would really screw people up and break things. So yeah,
I can answer that generally now, just for sake of time. It's every organization requires the external API right now.
Okay, Okay, yeah. So as of now, I added the proxy address as like a third optional parameter, which is really only necessary for the transaction send methods. But yeah, for some reason I couldn't get the past events to work with the code address parameter. So I don't need to labor over that on this call. I can follow up with the PR and stuff and try and help debug that. And in tandem with that, I don't think there are designs for this on the front end, but it seems really easy to just warn a user. Yeah, perfect. Yeah, so then there's some client changes that need to be made as well for that, which shouldn't be difficult. Profiles, there's a small PR that is ready for review. I know you all are probably pretty busy, but a couple important things to note is that at first, Gorka and I had talked about rendering a profile inside a specialized iframe, but doing that screwed up the CSS. So I don't know why that's happening. I didn't dive too deep into that because Pierre said it'd probably be okay to punt on it. Also, just sort of devising a way to resolve addresses to their 3-box identities in the Aragon JS. I'm planning on writing up some documentation on how we could implement that and sync with people to make sure we're all on the same page. Lastly, just with IPFS and this cluster stuff, this week is IPFS camp, which is super exciting. And Hector, the lead dev, is going to take a look at some of this smart contract based IPFS cluster stuff. So hopefully we should have like an updated spec for that as well. And I can post here in the chat the doc for what's there now. Cool. Yeah, that's it.
Awesome. Thanks, John, for this update from Open Work Labs. Sounds great. Maybe we can move on then to the mesh team with Daniel and Gabby.
Hello.
Hey, Daniel.
Hello. I have the notes here, if I can paste them, or perhaps you guys want to edit them, I don't know. But yeah, we've been working on the Nest update, and with this occasion, we've been reviewing and formatting the past achievements and past changes to the CLI. Now we have a changelog file, so there's a better place to see the changes in the CLI, and as well as we marked 3 versions as stable. So if some stuff is not working, people can easily roll back to an older version. And we made some progress on AGP 28. So soon we will have something to show with that. On the code-specific changes, we set up Probot apps and switch from Greenkeeper to Dependabot for dependency management. It has a bit nicer UX, and yeah. And we've added APM IPFS gateway option, which will be used to download the artifacts. And default environments will point to the Aragon network IPFS node. So if you're using the CLI to see the apps installed in a DAO, you don't need an IPFS node locally, and you can read through the Aragon network node, because some people were having issues downloading the apps when interacting on Wikibay on our mainnet. And we also have some work in progress stuff. Mainly some changes to APM publish, because now we have the deprecated function change, which will include a list of the functions that were removed in the smart contracts, and that caused RedSpec to not render correctly. And so far people had to manually copy those in the artifact. And now there is also a check to see if the APM publish command can reuse the artifacts, or if the smart contracts or the app needs to be rebuilt. And besides that, we've been working towards splitting the Go IPFS installation because it is very slow when you install the CLI. And also this past week, people have been running into troubles because the site was offline or responding very, very slowly. So we are working on a new command to install the IPFS separately after you install the CLI, and also to recommend people to install it only once globally, but if it's not already installed. But they should be able to install it locally as well in case they want to pin a certain version or something like that. And once those two are merged, we will mark the current nightly version to a stable release, and we will provide a changelog since last month when we released 9.9.3. So if people want to get the changelog for between stable releases, they can do that, so they don't have to keep up every single update. And I think that's it. Just one note on the stable and nightly builds. The nightly build is basically just the master branch being deployed very often, and that might break, but we will appreciate it if Nest or Flock teams will install it and try to use it and let us know if it breaks, so we can correct on that quickly. Otherwise, they can just use the stable version, and that should be not breaking that often. Yeah, that's all.
Awesome. Cool, Daniel. Thank you very much for all these things, and for the structured notes on the doc. That's nice and appreciated. Yeah. So let's move on to Aragon Black and hear about what you guys have been up to in the past few days.
Sure. So primarily this past 2 weeks or so, we've been working on the redesigns for the front end that Patty sent over. We're making pretty good progress on that. We added a new page for the configuration settings for the contracts, and right now we're in the progress of writing the background scripts to keep the data hydrated. We ran into some issues still with publishing the kit. Right now, we have a branch where you can publish the kit on a local dev chain, but we're still struggling with the Docker image and getting that working. And then we're also working on a deploy scripts to give the user the ability to view the DAO itself, like through the client, kind of without having to run the command, because given how the command, given how we're publishing the scripts now, it doesn't provide the user the DAO address. So we're trying to figure that out while we, trying to figure out how to fix this publishing nonsense. So that's primarily what we've been working on. I don't know, Deem, is there anything else you wanted to add?
No. So yeah, mostly the working on the 0.8 redesign. So I've been in contact with Pierre and Patty, talked with or discussed about that, and yeah, you pretty much covered it all.
Cool. Thank you. I don't know if anyone has been taking notes while Corey was speaking, so maybe guys you can have a look and complete. But otherwise, let's move on, and I can do a quick Aragon Association update. Yeah, in the past 2 weeks, we've been going to Zook to work a bit with the A1 team with Stefano. And we're moving forward different topics, like ongoing process. Like we have multiple work in progress, like on treasury matters, on dealing with the operational and the Swiss entity and Estonian entity for that is taking care of operations. And so still dealing with all of these things, and we're preparing a bunch of AGPs for the next Aragon network vote. A cool thing is we've been working with Otar to secure Nodit for their the planning suite, which has been renamed to Open Enterprise, or will be renamed to Open Enterprise. I don't know if that's the case for now. And so the apps are currently being shipped and on the way to be audited, which is cool, as there was a lot of demand for these apps to be on Aragon that was available on mainnet. And otherwise, yeah, I think that's a quick update, and that's it for now. Um, so I'll move on to discussions. We have a bunch of topics to talk about this week, and we have around like approximately 20 minutes left. Maybe we can start. So I know several people here joined for to talk quickly about documentation in Aragon. So maybe we can start with this topic. The idea here was that we have more and more questions around developer and user documentation, especially for apps developed by teams which are not um, the founding team. So basically, Aragon One has been managing and filling these hack.aragon and help.aragon um, uh, documentation hubs for both devs and users. And so um, the question is, do we want a central hub for all Aragon teams to use and upload their document user and developer documentation, or two central hubs, one for devs and one for users? What would be the apps that we would put there? On the forum, in the past, we've been talking about core Aragon apps, and so we would have to determine what is a core Aragon app, and then we can also talk about what tools we should use in order to do that. I don't know if anyone wants to start talking about what he thinks about the topic. I had several like interesting inputs. I know, like Yalda, you had needs around documentation. Um, I don't know if you want to add upon, like, on top of what I've just said.
Um, yeah, so we've been talking about this within Autark in general, as far as like, yeah, where will be the best place for us to start to add documentation about the planning suite apps. It's like, yeah, obviously we can put some in our GitHub and like link something on our website or describe it in a blog post, but that's not really going to make it, I guess, down the line easy for users to access it. And right now, I guess hack.aragon.org, it's more of a dev portal. And then I know that there's also like a knowledge base help portal. Um, so yeah, it would be good to have clarity around, the processes of when like these apps would be included there. I mean, I assume not until they're on mainnet, but from now until then, like people are still going to want documentation, and is it like optimal for us to just maintain it elsewhere, or like have documentation in a more like official repository that's like, oh, these apps are coming soon, you could start to test them on Rinkeby. Here's how you use it. So yeah, I think this is just like the purpose of this call is, yeah, what's the ideal way to coordinate this down the line so it is easy for users. And yeah, I guess the core Aragon app thing, I guess that's like a greater discussion because it relates to like the package manager and like what apps should be in the Aragon apps repo. Like what does it take to have the trademark of Aragon in your app name, and like what does that all mean? That's like an entirely different discussion, but one that we should probably think about soon, because I saw like for fundraising it was branded as like Aragon fundraising. So I guess what does that mean? Is projects not Aragon projects, or it's like when is that trademark used for an app? Because that has certain, I guess, implications to like the public of whether you're working on something that's maybe more important than something that doesn't have the trademark. That's that.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ella. Yeah, I think maybe we could split the topics in. I mean, treat the core Aragon apps topic separately and keep it maybe for later. Um, and so the question here, I think, if I can try to frame it, is, do we want each team to separately take care of its documentation and set its own documentation system, whether it's like user documentation or developer documentation, or do we want to unify all these, like, and centralize all the documentation from all the teams and all the Flock teams and even Nest teams when their apps are mainnet, um, to be available in one single place. And so on that matter, I was curious to have your take, John. I don't know if you're there. Um, to really to understand, like, whether you think that it would be interesting to basically extend the current tool that you're using at Aragon One to other teams, and to which extent it would be practical and easier, or if you think that we should adopt another approach. And I don't know about uh, overall, like, everyone, what do you think about adopting the current tools that A1 is using? And I mean, that's a question that came up to my mind.
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay. So hi folks, John Light from Aragon One. So I've been thinking about this for a while now, and actually have not really thought of a great answer to this question, for a couple of reasons. So as it was mentioned, we used to have our user documentation in the wiki. And the wiki, I liked the wiki because it was it's an open source tool, and anybody could contribute to it easily as long as they had a GitHub account, and send pull requests to update the user guide or add some new pages of documentation. Since then, we moved to Help Scout. We moved all of the user documentation to a tool called Help Scout, which is like a kind of like centralized third-party tool with like paid accounts to process user support tickets, as well as to build a knowledge base that you can currently see at help.aragon.org. And part of the reason for doing that was so that we would have a really easy way to get documentation into the app itself. So now, rather than users having to find the documentation in the wiki, they can just click a button in the app, and the documentation will pop up. And in fact, we have it set up so that depending on the app that you're looking at in the Aragon client, it'll take you to a particular section of the documentation. So it's been useful for that. But it poses a challenge for incorporating external contributors because of the fact that it's a closed system that requires like a paid account to access. And so if we were to start inviting third-party developers, or let's just call that anybody who's not Aragon 1, to contribute documentation to the knowledge base, there would have to be some sort of say process for either getting them account or giving them access to like a guest account to upload documentation about their app to the user guide. I'm not opposed to doing this. If we decide that the knowledge base is where we want to centralize all of the user documentation, I just wonder about the say scalability and coordination costs of this kind of solution once we're moving beyond even maybe a dozen or so app developers who aren't Aragon 1. And right now, I think we have maybe, off the top of my head, maybe 4 or 5 different teams building Aragon apps. And to date, those teams have kind of maintained their any documentation, if any, kind of separately. And so another like identity question that comes to mind here, identity is in the like say identity of the teams and how we represent documentation to users is are we treating Aragon more like a platform or more like a complete product, even with all of the third-party apps? Meaning like, Apple or Google don't have documentation for every app on their app store, like on the Google or Apple website. They let app developers, have their own identity and their own portals to documentation about their apps separately from the Google Play Store or the Apple App Store. Same with like any other kind of operating system. And so, yeah, it's an interesting open question of whether, we want app developers to maintain a strong identity separate from the core Aragon platform or client, and host their own user documentation and on a separate website or something like that, or whether we want to, include all apps as a Aragon product, so to say, and put them all in the same place, under the same roof in the same place. I don't have a good answer for that. And I think I would be very interested to hear really from the current app developers what they want.
Cool. Thanks so much, John, for all that. Very insightful. I don't know if any app developer in the room, other than Yelda has been expressing the point of view of the author team. I don't know if anyone from Aragon Black has insights over how they would approach or like to approach documentation, because I feel that in the end, so John presented a perspective where we would see that from the product. So are we going to present documentation as part of the product, or more on the team side? And it looks like you could also view it as like, will the teams and app developers prefer to keep documentation on their side, or put it in the decentralized help dev or like Scout tool? And so eager to hear your point, if you have any
Sure.
any stance at Aragon Black, or yeah.
Yeah, so Danny from AB here. We've been quite busy on the documentation side, especially with the fundraising upcoming release. So on that side, we have the usual technical documentation user guide for the Help Scout, but also we've been working on a FAQ, because in our onboarding process,
we noticed that many people had recurring questions that were, let's say, outside of pure, like let's say, user experience or deployment of a DAO. And these, for now, will be released on GitHub and Pando once the design is frozen, as Dean has said, there's been this redesign last week. And so for now, technical documentation is going in hike.aragon and user guide on help.aragon and the scouts. We also want to experiment deploying a DAO, probably with TPS and Pando, to give bounties for adding documentation. And one important other thing is we're going to create for fundraising some videos, as we did with Pando already. That basically just explains, visually and didactically how to install an app or how to use the bonding curve. And this, also for CLI and a general one on the client, and installing MetaMask even will be quite important. But yeah, we're looking very much at, Burata's proposal on the hub and this discussion, because we already had internal discussion about having on own blog the documentation, but actually having it segmented in one portal with different, let's say, verticals according to the medium of choice. Would be more simple both for users and for contributors to understand where these are, and it would also help a lot in the standardization of the formats and of the typology of mediums that we're going to communicate with the documentation.
Got it. So I'm curious. We'll soon have to move on to other topics, but I'm curious to understand what you were meaning when you were saying like one portal with different verticals.
Yeah, so having one general, like, for example, help.aragon would be not just the help scout, but would also have the dev document, like technical documentation, and would have also, videos. So basically a general portal about like learn about Aragon or help.aragon. And then how this would be done would be either, through a Pando or GitHub, like Yelda suggested, that there's a PR, and if it's added, it automatically pushes the new content to that portal for people to access. But basically, the segmentation should come from one entry point, in my view.
Got it. Got it. Okay. Does anyone have another like point of view on the matter?
So I've voiced something that's in the chat. But generally, yeah, the choice about help scout has been difficult in terms of generalizing this and making it scalable. But in the future, as we go along, we could potentially move away from hosting the documentation directly onto Help Scout and just having like a link to somewhere. Like if you go on the token manager, well, and the difference here is between the operating system as a whole versus each application that gets added on top. And particularly like each application, it's just more scalable. They host their own documentation somewhere. And the most Help Scout would do if you navigate to it would be like, oh, we know you're on this app. We know like there's some documentation here. If it's been added to the Help Scout database, go here to take a look if you're confused.
Got it. Anyone else?
I kind of want to kind of second what Brett's saying. I think also maybe the usefulness will arise more if we start having more interactions with the ordering API. Just like having all of those kind of intents across the different applications in a single place might be like more easily digestible than trying to like go to different content areas to try to find where that lives. So maybe if we do like a mix between these two ideas, just at least providing that section or as like part of that OS level API if it's deemed to be fitting.
So one thing we could definitely do is provide some sort of documentation hook. So when the app gets published, it could include like, this is where my documentation lives. And that way it's kind of already still included inside the application, perhaps on like the systems level. It's like, oh, we know you're forwarding through the voting app. If you're confused on what the voting app does, like it implements the forwarding interface that, you know, you can read about the documentation there. But if you want really big specifics, go to this link.
I think having like different maintained sites might get confusing because it's like a lot of the apps like forward to the voting app. So for example, we might say, oh, like you're gonna create a funding proposal in the projects app, and then you know, out of the box it goes to the voting app, and then it's like, oh, learn how the voting app works, and then now you're going to like another website to learn about the voting app, versus like maybe we would describe the voting app in the context of the projects app, and then you're like, more information to read about the voting app. But that's still like, as far as like how help docs work, usually it gives you like what you're looking for in the context, but then like more information that goes to like just like a specific about the voting app. So that's where the user experience of help would break down. If we're like, every team is like maintaining their own interfaces, and it doesn't look like whatever the core app docs look like. So I guess the question is, do we just like adopt some standard for each team that's doing it, and still like we can all maintain our own docs, but it feeds into like a common UI. I mean, that's what my vote would be, is like there's some way that it should be a unified experience, because like the thing that like we're trying to solve is like helping users. So we should think about what we can do to reduce the friction. So if they're using a bunch of different apps, like they're getting help and they're not getting like confused or lost.
Yeah, so like following up on like what y'all is saying, like this was there was this like proposal from a community member about like proposing basically to use Dockersaurus to create a standardized hub that could be deployed by any Nest or Flock team willing to document its apps. So basically, kind of creating this. So you can host your the hub wherever you want. Like the thing is like the UI and kind of formatting of the documentation is standardized. So yeah, this was also like one other approach, kind of middle way that we can have in mind. All right. Then if we are kind of running out of gas on this one, let's just keep thinking about it. I think I mean we're kind of going to increasingly need documentation, so willing to chat with you guys about it and coordinate between the teams to find the proper solution. In the end, I know that some teams are going to probably have to move on and create their own documentation quite quickly. I'm thinking about, for example, Otark, if they push their apps on mainnet. So yeah, eventually we'll have to deal with that. But the conversation is open now, and we can just keep chatting offline and find the right solution to this. So let's move on and try to thanks everyone for participating in this. And let's move on to the next topic, which is token manager strategy for quasi transferable tokens, which is put up by Otark.
Yeah, so I'm going to try and run through these as quickly as possible. And ideally, we won't get too into the weeds with these. For the token manager, basically, the summary of the problem is that we want to create a quasi-transferable token, which is basically going to be mini-me with whitelist transferability. And in order to control that whitelist, we'll need to modify the token manager, since the authorization structure of mini-me uses the controller, and the controller is the token manager. So in order to give Aragon roles to the ability to add entities to whitelist, we'll need to have a function that's role guarded in the token manager. The question here is basically, for this strategy, should we be forking the token manager and creating an alternative token manager that provides support for quasi-transferable and standard mini-me tokens, or is this something that people have interest in porting into the primary token manager?
Yeah, we've been talking about this with Luke especially, and I wonder whether, rather than building like whitelist functionality directly in the token manager or a fork fit, if it would make sense to have a standard interface that you can basically hook anything, like any contract to the token manager, that if you have it enabled, every time that someone needs to transfer, it will basically ask this other contract, hey, is this entity allowed to do this? So this way, rather than like coupling just like a whitelist functionality, you can have any other type of check.
Okay, so you would want to generalize the token manager to provide role control over all of the functions in any managed asset?
Yeah, so basically, rather than having like a whitelist in the token manager, to have a function to add like a transferability oracle, so that the token manager would just answer. And I would totally support having this in the token manager.
Okay. Yeah, I guess we'd be open to that. Can we sync offline and get some more clarity on the spec, because this is something that we'd be trying to work on probably in the next like 3 to 4 weeks. So as long as that timeline works and we can solidify a spec, we're open to this.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Cool. Sounds good. I guess let's move on then. So the Solidity 0.5 upgrade path. This came about mostly in connection to us trying to work with standard bounties. We have a way to we're able to just deploy it and then interact with it directly, but there are some hiccups, mainly around things like returning dynamic objects and structs, which is something that's not necessarily working right now for the wrapper and the client. Our short-term solution for this is we just want to make sure that everybody's okay with us pushing a change to the Web3 dependency in both the wrapper and the client. But long-term, we just want to have an idea of whether or not the idea of upgrading to 0.5 for Aragon OS contracts is on people's radar, and sort of wanted to start talking about it. But in terms of that, we're not looking for resolution on that now. So unless people have strong opinions, maybe this is something that we can talk about, the upgrade to the Web 3.1.0, and then move the rest of this potentially to another call.
Yeah. Okay, are you done, Arthur, on that?
Does anybody have any input on either of those points for the 0.5 upgrade?
I just want to confirm the Web3 dependency is, let's say, difficult to upgrade because there's a bunch of potential problems with the latest betas. We're pretty much stuck to using beta.37 as the highest number, I think, for a while, until we put in real effort into making sure everything works afterwards. But for the Pragma 0.5 issue, is it that you can't compile the projects app without having that dependency?
It's basically just, yeah, you can speak to this, Kevin.
Yeah, so it's not it's not so much that we're having any compatibility issues in terms of getting it compiled. We have a workflow set up for that. It's just that as we become more familiar with 0.5, we see a lot of opportunities to kind of make parts of Aragon OS kind of more readable, and also like just utilize some of the new functionality in 0.5 within Aragon OS and our own apps. So that's kind of why we're bringing this up. But with regard to like the more immediate issue of the Web3 upgrade, the fix we're looking for is in release 36. So 37 would be great if we could bump all the way up to that. That'd be really good.
Okay, yeah, we can try 37. As for problem 0.5, this is like a very long-standing conversation from the start of the year. I don't know. We could try to like upgrade some of the pragmas to support 0.5. I mean, you could try 14 Aragon OS and see how well that works, but there's a bunch of things we would have to change with the pragma version changing as well, probably. Even if it's just for the Aragon app class and its inheritance tree, which would likely involve a lot more pain as well in terms of getting things audited and etc.
Yeah, it's definitely not something that we have on our short-term roadmap or anything, but it's something that we want to start looking at because I think that eventually we'll sort of have to upgrade. But as long as it's on everybody's radar, I guess we can check back in on this. We don't have very much longer, and there's one more thing that we kind of need to get to from our perspective today. So can we move on to the PR review process?
Yep.
Is that
Let's
okay?
go.
Cool. So I guess the main question here is, would it be possible for us to start reviewing and bringing in SDK changes on our own? And if not, can we get any sort of commitment on like timelines or expectations around Aragon SDK feature changes? Because we have a lot coming down the pipeline, and we don't want to block you having to do reviews, and we don't want to get into a situation ourselves where we're blocked by reviews.
Yeah, this is definitely good to have a conversation about. We should definitely have some sort of commitment, especially because without one, it will result in frustration. The best thing I think that we can do is just have a little bit more communication about what's upcoming and what the size of the upcoming changes look like. That way, it'll really help us plan like what the effort around it would look like in terms of reviewing it. As well, if it becomes the case that you guys are adding a lot more functionality, it may make sense to give you guys a little bit of control in terms of the merging and things like that and releasing. But that can be something we touch on afterwards, because things right now are still kind of, let's say, in flux. And I don't think there's one particular place where we're defining the vision and like what's left in like an approachable way. So for now, I'd suggest just let's make sure to have a conversation about this. And the worst case, I'd say the turnaround time should be is a week. If we have something come in a week later, it should get pulled into the pull request pipeline for us and get reviewed, or rather the sprint planning process for us and then get reviewed. Especially they're very critical.
Right. Cool. Then let's move on onto the next topic. So the Aragon on XDAI chain topic. I don't know who wanted to bring this up.
Yeah, I can touch briefly on this. I think this has been talked about a couple of times on the forum and elsewhere. Originally, I think Protofire also wanted to do this, and I told them to make an EGP about it. But it's just a question of like what the sense of engagement would be like for us, because somebody would have to maintain the XDAI version of Aragon in some sense. They would have to like publish updates to it and figure out kind of a governance system. We're not really sure if like what type of organization that should be. If like a FLOT team wants to handle that, if a different team wants to handle that, I don't think the association wants to handle that. But it's just kind of a conversation to see like how much we want XDAI and where, if we do want it, where the responsibility would lie in terms of maintaining it.
Got it. Does anyone want to add on top of that? Yeah, I don't know, like, that's topic that probably, like, I'm wondering if a Nest team or like, if the project, it depends if the project would be suitable for a Nest team to undertake. In this case, maybe we could think about at the association, uh, like, write up a proposal, like a Nest proposal, and try to look for a team that which would be able to undertake the project, and probably then we have to deal with maintaining it. So it would be mainly maybe a, like, kind of long term endeavor that we would have to plan for. Otherwise, it would, I think it would really depend on whether Flock team is ready or has the bandwidth to undertake the XDAI implementation. I think that I don't know about. I think that all the Flock teams are pretty busy for at least for the very short term. So I don't know what you guys think, and if there's one team that who would find like logic to take the development and implementation of this XDAI chain within its own roadmap. That's something that I could see more at, for example, Aragon Black or A1. Um, I don't know what you guys think about it. Otherwise, we'll probably have to look for an external solution.
Yeah, it could be too that we just reschedule this for a couple of weeks or months down. I do know, yeah, like Gabby said, I this is something that Luke brought up, and I wanted to gauge the interest in this call for what it would look like. And just if anybody in particular is like super interested and wants to keep a tab on how XDAI is progressing, how the wallets are progressing, that type of thing.
Yeah, makes sense. I think, like, several people are really interested into separate chain, and for different reasons and use cases. So let's keep chatting about that. If in Yeah, as Brett said, if anyone is interested and has an idea about how to implement, very very happy to hear about that. And then I don't know if we have time, but maybe we can take the last topic for, so IPFS pinning with Pinata. This was probably added by John.
Actually, this was added by me, but
Oh, sorry, sorry.
I just also, similar to before, I wanted to gauge what the interest level was. Pinata, for those who don't know, is like an IPFS hosting service. You basically make an account. They give you for free 1 GB of hosting on IPFS for pinning things, and then you can upgrade by paying money for however much you need. But they've now integrated with Cloudflare. Cloudflare now like pulls directly from Pinata, which is really interesting. And it also provides a way, like almost like a Dropbox type of way for an organization to pin things. We could start adding things into into the CLI, into the client itself, to work with Pinata to say, like, give us the Pinata API key, and we'll just make sure that this works with your Pinata host or things like that. And I'm interested in those who have been thinking about the IPFS topic, like what their thoughts on, like, do a temperature check.
I think that's a great idea. That's super cool. I'd have to look more into it as well. I guess I have two observations and no opinions, but one is that I wonder if, and I know you sent a JSON sort of compatible endpoint. I wonder why they made their own endpoint, or if it's compatible with the IPFS API. One thing that Olivier brought up months ago was if we're going to be using sort of external services, I guess this is kind of paraphrasing his point, but if we're going to use external services, we should make sure they're compatible with the IPFS API so that we don't end up having to refactor things if we wanted to change in some way. And so I wonder, you sent an endpoint to their pinning JSON data. There's a native endpoint in the IPFS gateway, but it's called the DAG put. I wonder why they're not using that, or if they are using that. Yeah, I'd have to look more into that. That's one observation. And the second thing is API keys in general and how they work with DAOs. Is that something that you imagined, like a DAO has its own API key and that gets shared among the members, and they pop that into their settings? Or does each individual member have their own API key that they set up on their own, or either or? So yeah, I think it's really cool, especially that Cloudflare integration. So I have to look more into that. But yeah, that seems, those are two observations just kind of like off the top of my head.
Yeah, I was definitely thinking more towards the former. Like in your organization, you could share this API key with trusted members. It would be stored using the local storage, so it wouldn't be too much of a problem, I think. And then the way it works with Cloudflare, this is what really got me thinking about it, was now if we set the gateway host to Cloudflare, or even try to like somehow set up a connection with Pinata with our own IPFS nodes, Pinata is basically acting as the like persistent volume, and only one organization needs to pin its, or one member needs to go through and be like, okay, this organization right now, one of its contracts is saying it declares its IPFS hash. I'm going to go sync this with Pinata and make sure it's on there, and then the rest of the apps just work with it. And it seems to solve a lot of these UX problems we have with IPFS, where even if one node has it, like it's difficult to download from it. It usually times out a couple of times, so you're forced to just continuously retry, and if you don't know that you just keep retrying, then you just very quickly are like, okay, this thing doesn't work.
To me, and I think it could be something really cool to bring up at IPFS Camp and see, because it seems kind of like, I don't know if it's complementary or like a substitute for a cluster. But I'd be interested to see what the IPFS people think of it too. So it's something we can ask them.
Cool. Awesome. I think we're done for today with the discussions. So thanks everyone for attending, and see you in 2 weeks for the next All Dev.
See everybody.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye,
See
guys.
ya. Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye.
Bye.